Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the Haydn Symphony Crusade. Yes, we're crusading. Get on your horse, pick a hair from Peter the Hermit's mule, and let's get going, shall we? Yeah, now we're up to Symphony number 58 in F major. But although we're up to Symphony number 58, if you were listening to 57 very carefully, you may think that 58 sounds a little bit earlier. And it is, maybe a decade earlier. It's really from Haydn's late early batch of symphonies, late early period, because, the chronology of these things is all mixed up. The numbering has nothing to do with when they were written. There are only a handful of Haydn manuscripts that we can actually date. But one of the reasons we know that this is an earlier symphony is because it has no woodwind parts in the slow movement. That's usually a dead giveaway for an early Haydn symphony, because Haydn loved color, and he slowly figured out how to integrate all of the instruments into all of his movements, to maximize both color and contrast. In the earlier period, contrast was the thing, because he was a very tiny little orchestra, just a couple of oboes, a couple of horns and strings, and so the slow movement was that moment of repose, and the woodwind players got a bit of a rest, and they kind of needed in this symphony, because this symphony does some very interesting things. Even though it's an earlier symphony, as always with Haydn, we see him experimenting and playing with the very language of music itself. In this particular symphony, and this is a fascinating thing, all of the movements except the second, 3 out of the 4 movements are in triple meter. That is sort of waltzy tempo. But, the things that he does, because in every movement of the symphony, including the second one, he takes the meter as sort of a background and alters the foreground in some rhythmic way, in some way to try and fool us as to what the actual meter is going to be. The very opening of the symphony, for example, and by the way, this is going to be a relatively brief talk because each movement is such a clear example of what it is. In other words, there's such iconic and interesting examples of one basic principle. So you don't have to get too complicated with other things. Like I said, that principle is the difference between a steady rhythmic background and a rather interesting foreground. So the opening of the symphony begins somewhat like a minuet. It sounds a little old-fashioned. And it just, it's just 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, da da dum, but 3. Oh, it's just charming and delightful. It has like a little waltz-like feel to it. Haydn marks it allegro. It doesn't feel like an allegro. It's so relaxed and mellow. But by the time you get to the end of the exposition, you're going to realize it's really moving. It's really moving rather quickly, actually. And how does Haydn do that? He does it by breaking up the basic quarter note pulse 3/4 time. It's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 into triplets. A triplet is 3 notes in the space of a single note, usually. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, it's da 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 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So even though that opening doesn't sound very quick, when he starts breaking it up into triplets, it's going really quick. And that's the whole point of it, how he can take this sort of moderate, relaxing, lovely little minuet rhythm and turn it into a tightly coiled mini volcano of rhythmic energy, which you'll hear by the end of the exposition. And he does it by gradually interleaving triplets with the regular rhythm until finally they take over the music completely, both in the melody and in the bass. And you should pay great attention to when it's on top and when it's on the bottom, because in both ways, it carries the music along. When it's on top, it's a bright and sparkling and vivacious sort of melody. When it's on the bottom, it's like a current of strongly flowing river, that's rushing towards something. It's just marvelous. And you only need to hear the exposition to get the sense of what he's doing. And then the rest of it is all just playing with that principle. And he does it, of course, delightfully and unexpectedly and in all kinds of interesting ways, in the major keys and minor keys, in ways that add emotional and expressive depth. I mean, it's always a little bit different, but it's just marvelous. So this is the Austro-Hungarian Symphony Orchestra, right? Isn't that what they are? Yes, the Austro-Hungarian Haydn Orchestra with Adam Fischer on Nimbus, because they've given me permission to use this set as well as the Naxos set and some other things. So we're interleaving now other performances, which is really quite wonderful. And these are very good performances, most of them, these middle period Haydn symphonies that Fischer did before he went completely insane in his late Haydn remakes on Naxos that we've been trashing at the same time as we're doing these. Anyway, so here is the exposition of the first movement of Haydn Symphony number 58. You see what I mean? Haydn does this marvelously. He really does. I mean, this whole concept of beginning, with something that seems so completely innocuous and then letting it slowly bear its fangs. You know who else does this, who does it marvelously, is Brahms. I mean, if you think of the opening of the Fourth Symphony, for example, or the Second Symphony, where it seems very, very dreamy and sluggish and not going anywhere, and it slowly accumulates energy until by the end of the exposition, you realize that you've really been moving very quickly and very strongly ever since the beginning, but the music's been slow to reveal itself. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And Haydn was an absolute master at it. It's something that Brahms obviously noticed very well. Now, the second movement is in 2/4, and it basically does what the first movement does. 2/4, it's just, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, like that. But again, when you break it up into triplets, it gets much more interesting. But here the triplets are well, this is the cool thing. In the first movement, the triplets are eighth notes. It's da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, 1, 2, 3. Well, here, they're sixteenths. So they're moving twice as fast as the ones in the first movement. So you've got, let's see, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. In other words, because the movement is actually slower than the first movement, the tempo seems almost the same, because the triplets are in smaller note values, so they go even faster than in the first movement. And that gives this Andante, which is just, gradual walking tempo, again, a wonderful, wonderful jolt of energy and a beautiful, affecting harmonic outlay, because Haydn uses these triplet passages when they take over the whole orchestra to write some of his most harmonically expressive music in the movement. So I'm going to play you the entire exposition, the entire first half, which is, because it's a slower movement, it's longer than the one in the first movement. It's a slower tempo. It's a little bigger. And you'll hear how in this 1, 2 sort of framework, Haydn is creating a very similar, rapid, impulsive movement in triplets. Fast current of music. And here it is. So these are the first two movements. Now, the first two movements have a very regular rhythm, even though he's broken the rhythmic surface up to make the music, seem to move far more quickly than perhaps it really is. The actual rhythm is very straightforward. In the first movement, it's 1, 2, 3, 1, and the second movement, it's 1, 2, 1, 2. It's strict rhythm, and it's normal, which you might call normal rhythm, with the accents where you expect them to be. Now, in the rest of the symphony, he's doing just the opposite. What he does is he's taking a regular triple time basis. In a minuet, it's 1, 2, 3, just like we heard the first movement, right? But the surface is going completely haywire. The melodic surface is entirely syncopated, and it's syncopated in two different ways. In the minuet is marked minuet alla zoppa, and alla zoppa means limping. It's a minuet with a limp. So it ain't going to get the 1, 2, 3s exactly the way it's supposed to go. Actually, they go 1, 2. Well, you have to hear it. It's a very, very funny movement, and it's actually almost a parody of a kind of Baroque minuet. The sound is very Baroque because you have the violins and the oboes doubling the melody most of the time, which is like Handel used to do or Bach used to do. I mean, it has that old-fashioned sound, and the horn parts sort of punctuate in strange places where you're not quite sure where they're coming in to emphasize certain notes. It's just delightfully off-kilter, the whole thing. It really has a limp. If you count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 underneath this melody, you're going to find yourself hopelessly confused. It's actually very hard to do. It's very hard to keep up because the tune isn't paying any attention to what's going on in the bass. It's just deliciously tipsy. And so I'm going to play the whole minuet without repeats so that you get a sense of its limping gait. Amazing, isn't it? I'm sorry about the reflection of the light there. Well, anyway, it's just delightful. It has such a sly kind of humor and wit to it. But the interesting thing about this kind of syncopation, the syncopation means an accent which is not on a strong beat. You make the accents on the off beats, the beats which aren't the principal beats. In a minuet, the principal beat is the first beat. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Not quite as much as in a waltz, but similar. And so here, the accent could be on the second beat, on the third beat, and the accents flow over the bar lines. So it could be 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like that. It creates longer phrases within that basic small 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 thing. Now, the middle section of this minuet, the trio, is equally interesting. It's in a minor key. It's one of Haydn's Hungarian excursions, as the great Haydn scholar H.C. Robbins Landon used to call them. In other words, it's something it's ethnic music and mysterious, and it's only for strings. And I've noticed here it's for solo strings. I've noticed that Adam Fisher, who did the trios of the minuets of his late symphonies for solo strings as well, his latest set got into that rather unfortunate habit in these performances. It's not so bad in these performances because the trio sections are shorter, and if they're just strings, for example, they won't have woodwinds, so the effects of contrast aren't ruined the way he ruins them later in Haydn's London symphonies. Here it sounds fine, but you'll notice in this particular trio that it's almost rhythmless. The rhythm just goes away. It's just solemn chords, and you don't really need to even care or notice what the actual underlying rhythm is. Haydn has finally given us a break from this constant work on either triplet rhythms or syncopated rhythms or rhythm, 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 rhythm. So he said, okay, let's take a break. Let's just forget about rhythm and take a moment to journey into another dimension, the Hungarian dimension. Here it is. You see, it's just a few simple chords, but what a delicious impression it makes. Finally, we come to the finale. Of course, we come to the finale finally. At last, we come to the finale, and the finale is even crazier than anything we've heard before. What Haydn does in the finale sounds unbelievably complicated and upsetting almost, but it's actually very logical. It's extraordinarily logical. In the minuet, we found that the syncopations were over the bar line. That is, he was phrasing in larger than 1, 2, 3 groups. Well, here he achieves just as off-kilter and disconcerting in effect, but by syncopating within each bar in a very particular way. The very particular way is as simple as can be, but it sounds totally amazing. What he does is the finale is in 3/8. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's like that. And you would probably conduct it in 1. It would just be 1, 2, da, 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 da. Well, okay. But the accent, what he's done is he's created melodies that are always accented on the second beat of the bar. So the way it goes is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like that. While you have the basic rhythm underlying the whole thing in even eighth notes. So the result is really, it sounds like, the Rite of Spring goes to the classical period, if you know something about Stravinsky. I mean, it sounds very complicated, and then at a very quick pace, it's hard to do. But the logic is really inexorable, because what you're doing is accenting the second of the 3 eighth notes. Instead of going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, it's going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like that. I mean, it's easier for me to play it than it is for me to jump up and down and yell at you to the actual syncopation. Once you know what's going on, unfortunately, it may take a little of the surprise element out of it, and I don't mean to do that. But it really sounds like hard and complex and rich because of this perpetual syncopation that runs through the whole movement. It's got lots of little ideas, and most of them involve accenting the wrong beat of the measure in order to create that kind of constant unexpectedness, which is the very essence of Haydn at all periods. I mean, really. So let's listen to just the exposition, which is like 30 seconds. It's not long, of this finale, and you hear exactly what I'm talking about. Get it? I mean, it's so much fun to listen to, and it sounds so different from anything else in the classical period. I mean, anything else by Mozart, anything by anybody. I mean, nobody was doing things quite like this. And, the surprise and freshness of it is only matched by the inexorable logic with which Haydn pulls the whole thing off. And so a symphony which began as a totally relaxing, regular sounding minuet sort of merry-go-round music, da, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, waltz type thing, winds up as, completely spazzing out, basically, in the finale, in just a hilarious and incredibly witty way. It's funny music and fun to listen to, and it keeps you constantly off your game there. It keeps you guessing as to what's going to happen next. Absolutely brilliant. And the evolution is based, as I said, on this extremely simple idea of the difference between a regularly rhythmic background and a melodically extraordinary foreground. And the extraordinariosity is carried out differently in every single movement, but it's a consistent concept. So there you have it, my friends, Symphony No. 58, a piece that no one ever plays, like so many of these middle period symphonies, and which is just delicious, wonderful, refreshing thing to take a few moments and enjoy your life. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.